Okay, so on behalf of everyone present here, I invite Arjun Chetan into our midst. I think he does not require any large-scale introduction. He's a familiar person to anyone who is interested in history, geopolitics, or anything as such. So on behalf of everyone, I invite Arjun Chetan on the first live event of Kerala History, a conversation on Chera History. Just to give a brief introduction about Arjun Chetan to anyone who is not aware. Arjun and Ullas, who is better known by his Instagram ID, aka Geopolitics Dude, is a multidisciplinary preacher at an international school. His passion is on history, art, and economics of Indian continent. He insists on using the terminology Indian continent, and he has done a beautiful content on his Instagram on why we should use Indian continent rather than Indian subcontinent. And he's a scholar on Dravidian history. So it is our luck and it is our greatest opportunity to have Arjun and Chetan with us on speaking about Chera history. Along with Arjun, we have Raj. He's a PhD scholar who is doing his PhD in Paris, France. So he's going to be also in this conversation on Chera history. And to introduce myself is Joel Cherwardis, and I'm the founder of Kerala History. So without further ado, I think we can start the conversation on Kerala history, on Chera history. Can we? Shall we?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay, so I think I'll just start with the first question. Arjun Chera, can you give us an overview on the Chera dynasty, the extent, the control, the capital, and recently one of the quiz for Kerala history page was their emblem. So can you speak about all those tiny details in an overview, in a nutshell?
I think I'd like to start with a question. When you hear Cheras, what do you think of?
I think the first thing that comes to my mind.
Yeah.
I think the first thing that comes to my mind is the Chera mosque in Kerala.
Oh, well, see, that's the thing. Everyone has a different idea of what Cheras are, what they're supposed to represent. And in general, they are quite diverse. That's what I want to get at. Because we often tend to paint it as one glorious empire when it's a lot more than what it is. So basically, you have the Cheras starting from a place that we don't necessarily identify with when it comes to Kerala, and how it branches out into multiple factions, and eventually how it branches out into the petty kingdoms after its collapse. So when we have to think about the massive time period that they tend to cover. Now, when we talk of the Roman Empire, for example, when do you think the Roman Empire collapsed? When would you say that the Roman Empire collapsed? Anyone wants to comment? You can as well.
I think we could give the audience also a chance to answer the question.
Empires crumble slowly over time.
Exactly. So, like, we often refer to the Byzantines as just Byzantines, and we tend to differentiate it with from the Western Roman Empire. Someone has said the fall of Constantinople. That's a good one, because that's 1453, if I remember right. So that's obviously different from the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. Now, when we talk about the fall of the Cheras, it's not necessarily one event. Yeah, someone else said Eastern Roman Empire 14. Yeah, so it's not necessarily one event. It's a series of events, and the earliest Romans, for example, the Republic period, is not the same as what we see in 1453. That's a completely different. different dynasty in the sense of, well, first of all, the earliest ones were republics, and then you have I forgot what I was talking about. I think I was
Sorry.
pretty much done with that question. What happened between the third or fourth centuries till the eighth or ninth? So there was a transition period. Not sure if you caught that one.
Okay, sorry for that. Once again,
No worries.
Praj, you
Yeah, so that was my question. Like in the gap between the third and the eighth centuries, what really happened to the Cheras?
Yeah. So
Yeah,
I was talking about how there was a Calabra uprising. It's most likely that they were chieftains who took over the Movinder, who were supposedly locked up for a long period of time, and basically kept them as either vassals or puppets. And then I talked about the reemergence of the Movinder, and they're most likely not related. So the later Cheras or later Choras are not necessarily related to the older ones. They're either just people who claimed it, powerful nobility who claimed it, or far off offshoots who claimed the same thing. So that's what I was getting at. And I also talked about the Pandya domination between the 7th and 8th centuries. And basically, that weakened the Chera power at the time. So
I have another related question. So, are the Cheras ethnically pure Dravidian, or do they have some links from the clans in North India?
I generally don't prescribe to the concepts of Dravidian or Aryan because I see it as much more complicated than something something we can paint with two different colors. The history of the entire Indian continent is a history of multiple ethnicities, multiple communities, all mixing and blending. I mean, what we call as Dravidian can really vary. I mean, anyone's Dravidian if you just speak the tongue. I mean, over time, I'm sure my Kachi friend in Kochi will become, Dravidian because he himself claims he's Malayali, but he's got brown hair and white skin. So, what is really Dravidian in that sense? So if you're talking about who has more of the ancestral bloodline, I mean, that's a really tough cookie that because no one's really all that pure in the sense that it's just different percentages and doesn't really matter. Because NGS Narayanan, he talks of Nayars being descendants of Adivasis, and there are claims that Nayars are descendants of Aryan princes. Well, maybe it's all a mix. So it's not necessarily just one. Like we've been mixing and blending, despite the endogamy of caste. Obviously, centuries will just take that away. No matter how strict we are, it'll take that away. Because for power and prestige, some communities rise up. We see this happening in Kerala and even in the Deccan with the Chalukyas, for example. In Anirudh's recent book, Lords of the Deccan, I was reading about the specific case. Chalukyas being derived from the term Chalke, which basically they were cultivators who rose to power. So they rise to power, they mix with the other nobility. I mean, this happens. And later, more closer to our time period, we have the Marathas who were not seen as the higher castes, but they shift during the 16th and 17th centuries and so on. So yeah, this constantly has been happening and it'll keep happening, I think, it's for as long as we have caste barriers. But once we break that, it'll really be even more murky.
I think I just want to add something to there. While we are on the topic of Dravidian and where Dravidians originated from, I know you're a person who says that we should only consider Dravidians as a language entity.
Yeah.
But could you please, while we are on that topic, mention about Elamite Hypothesis and what it means to all the viewers that is out there?
Yeah.
Just a brief.
Yeah. So the Elamite hypothesis, which I tend to trust a little more. I guess I put in quite a bit of faith in Tony Joseph in his comparison chart. Now, we have plenty of vocabulary evidence that Elamite and Dravidian shares several words in common. Now, these aren't necessarily related by language family. It could be from trade. We don't know. But the fact that words like bal and all of these tiny little words that you wouldn't generally think of as having come from trade they seem to be related, or we're not sure if it's a coincidence, but there seems to be quite a bit of a vocabulary relation. And on top of that, Neet is asking us to speak in Malayalam. Depends on our audience, man. Sorry, mate.
I think we can switch between Malayalam and English for everyone to get a better idea.
Making everyone's life worse. വേണേ മലയാളത്തിൽ സംസാരിക്കാം, എനിക്ക് കുഴപ്പമൊന്നുമില്ല.
നമുക്ക് സ്വിച്ച് കുറച്ച് മലയാളം കുറച്ച് ഇംഗ്ലീഷ് ഉപയോഗിക്കാം.
പച്ച മലയാളം ആരിഷ് അവിടെ സന്തോഷിക്കും. So, wait, I shouldn't say സന്തോഷം. ആരിഷിന് കുറെ ഇമ്പം വരും. And even Praj, actually. So, yeah. So, as I was talking about the Elamites, we have the vocab evidence, and there's clear evidence of a certain group of Iranian farmers who are not obviously related to Iran as it is today. They're not the same as the Indo-Iranians, but a people group from the Zagros. So I tend to call them Zagrosian farmers, having moved to what is now the Indus Valley. Once again, I don't think the Indus Valley was one monolith. It probably had several city-states, maybe completely different in linguistic diversity, but sharing the similar sort of trade and architectural traits, maybe even religious traits. There may have been similar deities, but I think it's very likely that we had several languages in the Indus Valley. So the Elamite hypothesis basically says that Dravidian derives from what is now the Zagros, and then spread across the Indian continent, mixing with other languages that used to exist. Obviously, we've had other language families that have completely disappeared. So that's why again and again I tend to reject everything in the binary terms of Aryan Dravidian, because it's way more complicated than that. We just tend to not think about it because it's not recent enough for us.
So I have another question. In one of the Ashoka edicts, I think the Chera emperor was called Kedala Puto. So that's suspiciously close to Kerala. So did Kerala exist as a separate political entity within Tamilagam at that point?
I mean, it's very likely because of the geographic the geographic features of the area, because you have the Western Ghats slicing through Tamilagam, except for points below what is now Kanyakumari and the Palakkad Pass. So it's very likely the Greeks had several names for us. The Greco-Romans had several names for us. So but you can't really see it as how we see Kerala and Tamil Nadu today. Like, people had general terminologies for the general region, and they were called multiple things. And it's not necessary that a person from Ayanadu would see a person from Cheranadu as closer to them as, as opposed to a Pandian or other hill tribes nearby. So it's not necessarily true that they had this Keralite identity in that sense. That's way more recent. Even the Malayali and Tamil ethnic identity as an ethnic group is very recent. Like, we were always just small communities within the greater Tamil sphere. So it's not necessarily true that people saw themselves as Malayali or Tamilan, because that's very recent.
So one of the Chera kings, he was called Imayavaramban, right? So the one who has Himalayas as his boundary. So is it really true that he led an expedition to the north, or is it just a myth by poets?
It's logistically crazy to think about, because you're literally looking at, I mean, we've had figures like Alexander and Shah doing massive expeditions, but then again, they were more logistically linked within that land, because Anatolia had several routes that were constructed beforehand to connect Persia to the Aegean. But that's so much more smaller if you look at the difference between what is Kerala and the Himalayas. It's logistically a nightmare to think about. And one thing we should always know about South Asian kings, or kings in general, is that they love talking about themselves. They love boasting. Then, if we had to believe the claim of every South Asian king, then the empires would have boundaries that are like this, like going through each other, because kings constantly claim, like we have Deccan kings claiming that they took Kerala. It's not true. Like they may have had proxy wars, they may have an army passing by and like creating some kind of skirmish, but taking an entire land mass just like that is just crazy to think about. Yeah, there is a Chera inscription that talks about the Himalayan expedition, and even the defeat of the Yavana king of the area. So there are many claims that people make, but especially considering the logistics involved, the sheer demographics involved. I mean, Kerala is, the size of the Netherlands. You have to fight through empires that are bigger than France and bigger than Eastern Europe. So it's a mammoth task and very unlikely.
Okay.
Malayalam, I just mentioned that there is one more mention about Chera King winning a battle, defeating the Aryans. And he says that probably a praise for him, just to put it out there. I think we can move on to the next question.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so there is a division in Chera about like Chera Kungu and Cheraman Perumal. Can you please elaborate on that? Because whenever we speak on Chera, especially to a Malayali audience, നമ്മൾ Chera എന്ന് കേട്ടാൽ ആദ്യം വരുന്ന Cheraman Perumal, and as I mentioned in the start of the live video, Chera എന്ന് കേട്ടാൽ Cheraman Perumal Mosque. That's the only thing that comes to our mind. So can you speak about the division between Chera Kungu and Cheraman Perumal?
Yeah. ഇപ്പൊ കൊങ്ങുനാട് എന്ന് കേട്ട് കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ എന്താ തോന്നുക? എവിടെയാന്ന് തോന്നുക?
around സേലത്തിനടുത്തല്ലേ? സേലം ആ ഏരിയ.
സേലം, കോയമ്പത്തൂര്, കറൂര് ഇതൊക്കെയല്ലേ? So basically കൊങ്ങുനാട് എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് it's like that extension from the Palakkad Pass, right? നമ്മുടെ ചേര heritage തുടങ്ങുന്നത് തന്നെ it starts from Karur in Kongunadu, right? So, and then you have them controlling various port cities. We don't know when exactly it starts, where exactly the Chera power center was. There are mentions of Karur and so on. We don't know what exactly they controlled in the beginning. So, and then we have the rise of port cities. Now, when I say port cities, which ones do you think about in that time period?
Muchiripattanam.
Muchiri. Pinne?
Kollam.
Yeah, Kollam.
There is another mention of
Vanji.
Yeah. So all of these
ports in the map, in the Roman way map, but I forgot the name. It's somewhere near
Tiny? Yeah. So there are multiple ports. Now, why do you think these ports happen a little later, perhaps after 100 CE? Why? Yes, Tindis is Tondi. Yes, that's correct. Why do you think it happens a little later? Do you
Because
have
that's
any ideas?
maybe that's when the trade started with the Greeks.
There you go. Perfect. Exactly. Yeah, Periplus. Yes, he marks it proper. Now, the Romans once they take Egypt, what happens is they figure out a uh, proper way of using the monsoons to get to Kerala quicker. Now, we've had trade before, but it multiplied a lot. Especially with the Mediterranean after this monsoon thing happens. So they figure it out. They come billions of dollars worth of trade. Uh, it's been built over time, and we sell spices, things from what we get in the Western Ghats and so on. So eventually, all these port cities grow big. They grow massive. They grow powerful and influential. So you're seeing a shift in power from what is Konganada. Yeah, someone said Puhar as well. Yes, that's another one on the other side. That's true. So what we're seeing is a shift in power, and the fact that um, you have uprisings of the Kalabras and eventually the Pandya conquest and military defeat of the Cheras, and the rising control of the Nambudiris. Basically, what happens is Konganada Chera lineage, the supposedly original one, it splits into the Makotai or Mahodayapuram lineage, which is said to be in Kodungalur, with their patron site at Tirunjikulam. Now, what happens is these Perumals, we can assume that they almost are hand-picked by the Nambudiri factions, and there are multiple Nambudiri factions. So the Chera Perumals aren't, they are famously religious, they're famously dabbling with multiple faiths and cultures, making trade deals and so on. But they also seem to be quite handpicked, and you also observe the distribution of power between Brahmin factions and various other factions throughout the countryside. You have several Nardavaris getting more and more powerful. So this time period of the Chera Perumals and the Kongu Cheras, it's completely different from what we think of when we look at the early Cheras. It's like a completely different culture. The early Cheras, they come from mostly a time period before the rise of the big port cities. And we have excavations and so on, but it's as you look at the scale, it's nothing close to what it was in the 8th and 9th centuries. So that's the difference. Kongucheras and Perumals, they split at a certain point, and it's quite murky as well. We don't have enough information to put a clear time period, but historians like N.G.S. Narayan and well, not just historians, even Gunther has mentioned stories from oral history. So yeah, so we have a few epigraphic evidences of this period, but it's not very clear. But there is a split that happens.
Just a follow-up question on that. Do you think, sorry, Bras. Do you think politics played a part in the division between or the clash between Kongu and Chera and Perumals?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, this happens with every empire. Yeah. Yes.
Especially, I think Pandya influence. Do you think such a thing happened?
It's very likely. Now there is a time period when the Kongu Cheras are their capitals ransacked by the Hoysalas in the 1100s towards the end. At that time, the capital is called Talkad or something, and then you have and before that you have the Gangas taking power there. Another dynasty called Kongu Ratas, and another one which are the Kongu Choras after the Choras take control of the region. So what we're seeing is a split in power. The three crowned kings, the Movendar, they're constantly plotting against each other. It's not just Choras and Pandyas, trying to mess with Cheras, but even Cheras often sent in armies into the Pandya Nada side, into Ayanada, into Chora Nada, and so on. Someone else has asked, is it true that Konganada people migrated from South Karnataka? That's a very important question, because South Karnataka and Konganada are so close that there's so much influence coming in from the not just the Deccan empires, but even the small chieftaincies of Malenada, and that grow into bigger kingdoms, especially around Mysore, having some influence there. You have several communities within the Konganada region, especially in the hills, that speak languages close to Kannada. So it's that point where loads of people are migrating and mixing. Konganada is such a place. The name of Konganada itself is murky. You have one theory that says it's derived from the Gangas, the Western Gangas, that a group that ruled what is now Konganada, parts of Konganada, and the Malenada region as well. And then you have various other groups that control the region, various communities migrating in and out of the region. So it's a very diverse sort of landscape. So it's changed hands so many times. Now we imagine it as part of Tamil Nadu, but then again, you also have the Konganadu movement for them to establish their own state. So it's never constant over there.
Okay. So another question that I had was, the Malayalam calendar was established in AD 825 in the Kulashekara reign, right? So I saw a theory that it was started because they reclaimed the Kollam port, but there are also some other theories circulating. So what is your take on that?
I have seen many theories. I actually don't have a take on this because I simply don't know enough. I've tried many times looking into this, and I see conflicting evidence every single time. So I'm not sure about the Kollavarsham. It also seems that the Kollavarsham is different from the regular Hindu format calendar system as well. So I'm not sure why. I've seen too many conflicting reports. I'd like someone from the audience to recommend one of their suggestions for why Kollavarsham is what it is. If anyone has ideas, I'd like to see that, because I'm not sure. I actually don't have a take on this. I've actually looked into it multiple times and failed. So what about you? What do you generally think? Praj first.
I think that, like I said, I believe that theory. I think it was due to the reclamation of the Kollam port, because I don't see any other reason why they would name it as Kollam, because it's something related to the city, sure.
Perhaps. Joel, what about you? Do you have any thoughts on why Kollavarsham is what it is?
It is so complicated because of the use term Kollam. Because Kollam is a historically important place. So, like, there is a theory that Kollavarsham was established after the arrival of two foreign bishops called Safor and Floth. If we go by that, theory, that will completely destroy the reclamation theory. So, I think Kollam has an important place. And there was an ancient civilization called Sendurani civilization that is so close to Kollam. So we don't know if it has something to do with that also. I think it's really complicated, and we don't have conclusive evidence as of now yet.
Yeah, that's why I don't have a take on this, because I don't trust any source on this. I really don't know what to say about it. So yeah, well, I'll trust your theories for now. So let's see what happens next. Another derivation of Konganada is said to be linguistically from honey or something. Then there's another one that relates it to Gang. So we don't know. Like, there are so many different theories for even the derivation of Konganada. So I can't trust anything. And that's the thing about our history, especially in the Indian continent. It's quite murky, because whatever epigraphic evidence is even given, it's highly infused with mythology, and we don't get enough archaeological evidence because of the way soil is. It's not easy. I mean, it's much easier to dig in a semi-arid region like Mesopotamia as opposed to, Tamiragam. So it's a tricky situation, this.
I think
Okay, cool.
there are some questions from the one of them, any marriage relation between Cheras and Hoysalas?
Hoysalas. I'm not sure about marriage relations because the rise of the Hoysalas almost coincide with the fall of the Cheras. Now, Hoysala marriage relations with Keralite kingdoms, very likely. I think especially around Wayanad and all that, it's very likely that they did. I do not personally know any particular stories about that. I know Wayanad often fell under the control of various Carnatic empires. And I mean, Wayanad, Malenad, and Konganad in general, it falls under that specific migration area. It's a migration zone. So yeah, it's very likely that Kannadiga royal families had marital relations with at least kingdoms in the Western Ghats in Kerala, and especially in Malabar. It's very likely. I mean, we know royal families do this all the time. So
I think there was another question before, which was interesting. It was regarding the naval prowess of the Chera kings. Like, were they really strong with their navy?
Of the Chera kings, we have some literary evidence of losing to the Choras. Even the ports being sacked. There's more evidence of trade and trade ships of the Cheras, but I'm not too sure about, especially since we didn't really have a proper Chera empire surviving in a healthy fashion into the medieval period. There's obviously no large ships like what the Choras built, but the thing is, again, early Cheras, very little evidence on anything. Like whatever we find, even if it's some inscription on Edakal caves, which we do. There's an inscription that says Chera. Forgot what exactly it was, but the Cheras are mentioned as one of the inscriptions on the Edakal caves. And we have excavation sites in Patanam, but that's like such tiny bits of archaeological detail, and most literary stories and whatnot that deals with Agam and Puram poetry, which eventually deals with bloodshed, but that's mostly in the land, mostly in what do you call that, the arid one of the five Sangam. There the five landscape, Nedal, Kuringi.
Mullai.
മുല്ല നല്ലതല്ലേ, കൊള്ളില്ലാത്ത സ്ഥലം. നമ്മൾ ഈ പാലക്കാടിന്റെ ആരിഡ് ഏരിയാസ് നോക്കിക്കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ അതിന് എന്ത് വിളിക്കും? ഒരെണ്ണം ഉണ്ടല്ലോ, പേര് മറന്നു. It starts with P. Palai, yes. So Palai, ആ ഏരിയയിലൊക്കെയാണ് പൊതുവെ ഈ പോരൊക്കെ നടക്കുന്നത് നമ്മൾ കാണുന്നത്. So all these Puram literature generally talks of the sword, the elephants crushing. We don't get a lot of literary evidence from naval expeditions, especially in the early period, right? We didn't have an intense competition, at least from literary evidence, we don't have an intense competition in that period like what the Romans had with the Carthaginians. We don't see evidence like this in southern India. So, and then the fact that Kalabras took over and then the Pandyas defeated us, we don't have a lot of Chera naval stories, at least from what I know. Because we know the Pandya and Chora kings who go into Sri Lanka and ransack, even in the early period. We have the story of the 5 Dravidians, the 5 kings who ruled parts of Sri Lanka. So, but not really from the Chera side. We don't have much of it.
I think
I
I've
just
read
don't have it.
somewhere about Chera. He was known as Kadal Piragotiya Cheran. Like
Oh,
maybe it's just like praise poetry again. We're not sure, but
it could be, but then Kadal Pirakote Jairan